Spin that damn wheel. Who's ready?
Spin it. Go for it.
Can I get a whoop whoop? No, okay.
Whoop whoop. Oh, listen to that.
It's a real spinning of the wheel.
It's like we're crossing podcasts.
Public speaking.
Okay, so we know what we're going to talk about today. So I better start with saying hello. So welcome to this week's episode. We're going to speak about public speaking. We have just run the Wheel of Doom, I think is what it was called. Wheel of Destiny is probably the better way of doing it. And found out public speaking is our topic of choice. So today, joining me to talk about public speaking, we've got Chris Armstrong.
Howdy.
Simon Pryor.
Hello.
David Minall.
Hello.
And I'm Russell Craxford. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you to our sponsors. We'd be delighted to be sponsored by Saffron QA. They're specialists in testing recruitment. They provide a range of bespoke recruitment services to organisations across the UK. And if you'd like to see further details, please check out our show notes, visit saffronqa.co.uk, and just reach out to us as well. So, Chris, you are the man of the hour.
Yeah, well, here I am, baby.
Yes.
Signed, sealed, delivered. I am yours. You'll notice I ruined that. So what I was thinking about was doing stuff in public is pretty damn scary and frightening. And we have imposter syndrome and we have all these sorts of things. We're going to talk more about why we might do those things later regarding work. But can anyone think about something they did in their childhood or youth that was kind of like a public performance and share a little bit of maybe some failures or successes from those moments?
I've got one. So when I was a teenager, I was in the Air Training Corps, or the Air Cadets. And I remember on several occasions, I was the flight sergeant in charge of the drill commands while we're marching on a parade. Or there was even a festival where it was in a stadium and I was part of the marching group, but I was also shouting the orders, and obviously in that kind of environments, you have to shout quite loud. And I remember losing my voice towards the end and trying to have to really screech to try and get my words out to make sure the band, the drill team could still hear me over top of the military band that were playing right behind us. So that was an interesting experience. I learned to sort of elevate my voice to a level that could be heard, and all those shouting techniques of, doing it from your stomach and not from your throat, etc., etc. So yeah, that was an experience, and I think it's helped me.
So I've got nothing really exciting to add, if I'm honest, because I think after doing like nativity plays, as you do as a sort of first school sort of thing, I pretty much avoided anything involving public speaking. Obviously, I had to do the presentations in front of class, which is a form of public speaking, but that was about as far as it got for me. I just wasn't fond of it, didn't like it, so just didn't like being stared at by everyone, really, so I kind of always avoided it. So no horror stories, just general displeasure.
So mine isn't really about public speaking. I mean, I did appear in some plays and stuff, but I do remember I appeared on a Christmas show as a part of a choir. So it was more of a part of a choir, really, rather as was a group activity. I might have mentioned it before, but I was on Nanette Newman and Friends from Salisbury Cathedral. And just recently, I did actually find a clip of myself as it was released at Christmas on Boxing Day. But have I learned anything from it that I didn't perhaps, as a 12-year-old boy in the early 80s, it wasn't the most fashionable, I would say.
Well, that's interesting. I think if we cast our mind back to episode 1, which, by the way, listeners, was 2 years exactly from the date that we're recording now, that we published it. So that's a little happy birthday to us. I mentioned that I was a gymnast, and I did the 1991 British Schools National Gymnastics Finals, and didn't manage to make it into the top 10 even, but scored quite highly. And for my school, that was quite a big thing. And so there was like a summer fair, like a school fete kind of thing that we had. And myself and my partner, who were at the school, we were asked to do a presentation because we'd obviously done the routine at the national finals, and so they wanted to sort of show off how the school had these celebrated athletes, as you can imagine I would be. Anyway, I'd already found the national finals quite scary because the nerves had got to me, the adrenaline, and I was a bit shaky. But I was so much calmer at the school fete. And what happened instead was, even though I'd rehearsed it and practiced it loads of times, and there was even less pressure now, I completely disoriented myself by missing my mark by around about 90 degrees. And so I thought, I will adjust myself with a handy backwards roll in a different direction. I may have caused a slight collision. And the thing there was, actually I performed better under pressure, even when I was a bit shaky and scared, than when I'd taken the foot off the gas, if you like. But performing under pressure only works if you actually know what you're doing, because otherwise, I mean, I probably would crash and burn at that point as well. Right, well, I think I've embarrassed myself again, so well done me. Let's move on to public speaking. Now, in the context of our lives, we obviously do a podcast now in testing. That's our thing. But to one degree or another, all of us have spoken at meetups or conferences. David's even wearing a hoodie tonight, listener, from a conference he spoke at yesterday. That's how recent this really is. So do we want to talk about maybe why the heck do we want to do this thing that probably we're all terrified about, that gives us a lot of headache, a lot of admin, and a lot of work? Why do we do it? Let's do that first. Why bother?
I think for me, it was all about feeling like I had something of value to give back. You know, I wanted to help other people learn from either my mistakes or from my experience or from what I'd done. But when you're thinking, oh, I want to talk, I want to do a talk at a conference, you're not thinking about what it will be like to stand up in front of an audience to be able to do that. But I'd had the advantage that in my job at the time, when I did my first conference talk, I'd been going out to schools talking about internet safety, and I'd spoken to school audiences of 500 to 1,000 talking about how they should use their safe Facebook page or how they should set their privacy settings on this and the other. So that kind of gave me a little bit of confidence that, you know, if I can talk to a room full of 1,000 students that are heckling me, then I can probably talk to a conference of professionals that are there to listen to talks like mine. But that didn't take the nerves away. So it was all about wanting to give back, but, you know, I didn't think it through fully before I did it.
I think for me, it's sharing a story or sharing knowledge that we've got, and that actually it reinforces the understanding that although the exact detail might be different, there are similarities in most stories that people can share. And I think personally, the best stories in terms of public speaking are those that have an element that people can learn from, you know, that they can have a takeaway or they can relate to, and they can see it working in their own workplace, I would say.
Mine was all about trying to give back. I kind of gone to conference and some events and had the opportunity to do it, which not everyone does. I remember when I started out, I didn't have that opportunity, and I wanted to learn, I wanted to share, and I wanted to help others, and there wasn't anything going on where I was. So I kind of went, well, I don't like doing this, but if I don't do it, no one will. So it was kind of enough motivation to kind of get me started, and the hope that I would help people, and then some positive feedback along the way. Keep doing it, and so on. It kind of grows from there.
My motivations have changed from when I first did it. I think when I first saw people doing it, I kind of thought, I can do that. You know, that sort of naive, childish mind of things. Oh, I've probably got something that's really unique that no one's ever heard of, or my experiences. And to an extent, my experiences will be unique to myself, but actually I discovered through the process of writing an abstract or blogging or whatever that it's not just a cut and dried sort of simple idea that I can just sort of meander and talk about, which I get accused of sometimes by you guys. But actually, the thing that motivates me now is it gives me an excuse, a motivation, a reason to really deep dive into a particular subject area or something that I want to talk about, apply it to my own context, but to portray it in a way that I think is accessible. And to your point earlier, Simon, to help give back, to share my learnings, my failures, my successes with people, but to come at it with enough thought and investigation and research that it actually doesn't feel like a throwaway sort of on a whim kind of thing. And there is a real motivation that I have in my work, that I just want to be helpful. And if something that is from my experience can be helpful and be well articulated to somebody, just one person, then I see that as a win. Even though, really, let's be honest, and we'll talk about this in a minute, how much work goes into doing a talk? Like, if we go to you, David, if it's all right, how much prep did you have to put into to have for your talk that you did yesterday?
Quite a few number of hours just planning the sort of story arc, and then getting the data, getting the visuals, and then also we needed, buy-in from the client and the company as well, because we were doing a project. So yeah, so it was a lot of effort. We didn't underestimate the effort, but because we put a lot up front, because we knew we had to get through a lot of hurdles. But there is, I would one of my takeaways is, don't leave it to the last minute. Make sure that you plan ahead so that you give yourself enough time to actually practice. But yeah, there's a lot of work and you shouldn't underestimate it.
I think everybody is different with how they prep and plan for something. I'm certainly one that I want to get my slides done, not months in advance, but a while in advance, that I've got time to almost let them bed in. But I will not practice. I will not stand and talk for half an hour to walk through it. I might flick through the slides and look at the slide and work out what I'm going to say, but I don't physically stand up and rehearse it. I will just try and look at the slides and recite in my head what I'm doing rather than actually speak it out. Because I find if I start practicing it, I end up getting into too much of a regimented what I'm going to say on each slide. And then I end up falling over myself when I do the actual real talk, because I've got in my head what I meant to say. And then I slip the words up and I end up making it too formulaic for myself. So I like the free flow of every time I present, it will be slightly different. But as long as I have the slideware together 3 or 4 weeks in advance, that gives me the time to really work out on how I'm going to ad-lib it on the day.
I think there's a difference, because I was presenting with another person.
Yeah.
Therefore,
yes,
we had to practice. So therefore, because one person was in charge of the slide, so therefore we needed to know sort of keywords or what the gist of what they were saying, so that we didn't make it too different each time. So I think there's a difference between whether you do it individually, where you can make it on your own, and if you're doing it together.
Yeah. I think the other thing, Chris, to pick up on what you said earlier about your motivations changed from what you started with, I will be quite honest that one of my motivations when I first wanted to decide to speak was I'd seen people do presentations on topics that I was passionate about, and I didn't feel like they sold the story very well. I didn't feel like they sold the topic very well at all. I felt I could probably do a better job of it, give it more justice than what I'd seen in that particular talk. And I'm not going to go into details of what talks I'd seen, but equally at the same time, I'd seen some incredible talks on other topics and thought, wow, if I can be half as good as one of them. One that sticks out is Angie Jones's talk at UK Star, Chris, which I believe David and you as well, we were both all there for that. I think that's one of the best talks I've seen. And I remember standing there thinking, well, if my talk's anywhere near this, then it is even half as good as this, then I've done well. So there was 2 motivational factors there of seeing other talks on topics that I was passionate about and wanting to do my own take on it, and also looking up to other speakers and thinking, well, I need to. But now I think if I see a talk that doesn't do a topic justice, rather than wanting to do a better job, my motivation would be to try and talk to that person and say, hey, I think I can sort of help you improve that, if that makes sense. But that comes from having the experience now of being able to do the talks.
There is a thing, obviously, about the audience that we're doing it to. And I think one thing that we have said before is trying things out. Try talking to a smaller audience, maybe a trusted audience or a smaller group. That's why meetups can be such a wonderful thing, aren't they? Do you find that, I guess, in your process, we've talked about our process being quite differently. How do you find it asking for help and for feedback about not just your slides, but also your style, the way you talk? I mean, Russell gave me some great feedback from one of my talks when I was quite nervous, and I might have spent a little bit too long on the about me section, because that was the thing I was really not very nervous about. I could just talk about myself for ages and we'll just sort of somehow slip through this whole talk. But if I hadn't had that, I wouldn't have got better. And there is a level of sort of humbling yourself and those things. But what's your process look like when it comes to even preparing these things, let alone actually delivering the thing?
I'm often in a situation where I'm doing a talk with like 2 weeks, 3 weeks notice, which means I'm doing it on the fly and doing it just in time, and I'm tweaking it myself. Like I've almost written it within 1 week, but then I'm rewriting it and rewriting it and rewriting it. I don't really ever feel comfortable till it's finished. This terrible example of Agile. I should probably get some feedback on it and then use that rather than my own opinions, retweak it. But I know some of the things already I can self-analyze, I believe, relatively well, because I've seen lots of talks. There's too much on this slide. I'm rambling too much. I've gone off topic. It's not a good example. Things like that. I feel like I could do quite a lot of that. And if I'm honest, if I had more time and better time management, I probably would try and get you three and others to kind of look through it. But I also know that a deck without context these days is pointless. I could share with you a deck and you wouldn't have a clue what I was going to talk about, because most of the content's in my head, not on the slides. So you have to actually not just share decks, but you have to talk through what you're going to talk about.
Yeah.
So it's either a dry run or it's on this, I'm going to talk about this. On this, I'm going to talk about this. I'm not organized enough, generally speaking, to kind of do that. If it was for an abstract, we have to submit it weeks beforehand, it probably would, but then I would be able to tweak it. But I'd at least be able to finesse the presentation side.
I definitely would suggest you share ideas with people. It can be just this is the story arc. This is the idea of going through it. You could go through a dry run, especially if you're your first time person. And I think feedback is vitally important. I think that, even if you don't do a dry run, going through the slides and giving your thought processes behind the slide as to what, because obviously when you're writing it, you know what the message is for that particular slide. So actually, if you portray the message, even if it's not word for word, you like to do it a bit more on the fly, but giving that gist of why you've included that slide there is as, I think, as good as actually doing a dry run if necessary. And getting feedback is definitely a good thing.
I would completely agree with both of you. Actually, I might not, like you say, I won't necessarily do a dry run, but I still remember for some of my talks I've done in the last couple of years, walking you three and others through it beforehand. And I can think of one in particular, which I did back in 2019, where I put the deck together and I talked you through it. And there was 3 main sections to the talk. And you three all said those 3 sections are in the wrong order. And I couldn't see it. I thought it made perfect sense in the order it did. But actually talking it through with you three, I rearranged those sections. And actually, once we talked through it, that made perfect sense. And I then felt 100% more confident with the deck that I was putting together. And my nerves about doing the talk had suppressed, because I'd actually, found that happy place of, yes, I'm happy with this talk now. And that was because of, like you say, justifying why you've put slides in what order, talking through it with somebody is definitely, for me, more beneficial than actually standing in front of the mirror and rehearsing it.
Sometimes we're all guilty of getting sort of caught up in the detail or the excitement of getting our story out there. And so therefore we try and cram so much in, or as you say, we get lost in the story. And so therefore it all gets a bit sort of mixed up. And I think that's sometimes a problem with some speakers, is that they're so keen to get the story out that they sort of rush it, or do things in the wrong order, or lose context because they're just so excited to share it, and they haven't taken the time to talk to someone with possibly knowledge about it to ensure that the actual message is clear in their takeaways, so that it's passed on to other people.
One of the things for me is the slides are pretty last minute, if I'm honest with you. The most important thing for my process to date, and let's be fair, my process isn't perfect, and I will want to do the nice agile thing of iterating and improving on things. But for me, the most important thing is that I can explain to whoever I'm talking to. So right now it would be you three. I have got an idea. Does this make any semblance of sense to you? Or am I talking complete rubbish? And I have litmus tests. I'll throw it out to a few people. I think I used, we've got a speaking channel in the Testing Peers Slack. I use that to try and help shape my abstract. And for me, I've always found making slides and doing the talk actually a lot easier than making a bit of brevity, just concisely giving highlights of what I want to do. And I have this small part of me that doesn't want to give away the spoilers of the talk, which ultimately leads to people not wanting to see the talk because they don't know what it's about because I'm so vague. And so if I didn't have that sort of process where I'm talking through with people about my abstract, turning my idea into something that would look good enough in a submission to talk somewhere, if I don't get that, and I can't sell you guys on an elevator pitch, then it doesn't matter how nice this presentation and long talk I think I can do would be, because no one's ever going to ask you to do it unless you've got like a mate who says, hey, why don't you come up to my place to do these things? But even still, the big conferences and meetups and such aren't going to just invite us. We aren't Angie Jones. We aren't people that are going to get invited for keynotes every week, although some of us have been invited for keynotes, Simon. It's difficult, isn't it? Because the process isn't the same for any of us. And I guess the next thing I was kind of thinking about was, where do you even decide you want to talk?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's that what is it that makes you want to do a talk, and why? I think to spin it another way is if someone comes along saying, I think I've got something worth talking about, how does that translate into doing a talk? How would you get that person on board? But how do we get to that point? It's a good question. Not really answered that.
I guess it's usually either driven because you want to share, or driven because your career or something else you think will be benefited by doing something like that. I guess they're probably the two main motivations most people have. You think you've got a story, or someone's encouraging you to speak and share your story, or you feel it will benefit you to share it. And it could be to get over a trauma, because that's a good reason sometimes to share a story about testing disaster, or it could be about kind of, I said, trying to progress, but it's taking that leap though, isn't it? Going from that I want to I will. And Chris mentioned it can be quite hard to get your abstracts accepted. That's definitely one of the challenges, certainly trying to speak at conferences. And there's lots of conferences. If you actually sort of search around, there's conferences all over the world. The pandemic has helped make conferences a lot more virtual, a lot more often. So you're not restricted because you're in UK to talking at a conference in the Philippines often these days, because that conference could be virtual. I think Ministry of Test are trying to do a 24-hour event type thing, people all around the world talking, and it's getting more common to do that. So it's interesting because there are different things, and the scale of them is different. Your local meetup in your local village or town could be quite small, or it could be 150 people regularly attend that meetup, because it does depend. So it's trying to find the venue, the place, the forum that's comfortable. And often, I guess, it's speaking within your community, your company, or something like that is probably a good place to start, or within your friends. the peer group is often the smallest group you can think of.
Mm.
You might not all work for the same company, but just talking amongst your friends about a topic that's important to you can make you realize you actually have a subject that you can share.
Yeah, I mean, the meetup thing was I was definitely of the mindset that I didn't want to do talks, but I wanted to sort of open a community and start growing a meetup community locally. So I started the Aylesbury Tester Gathering at that point back in 2015, and at that point I had no intention of speaking. But obviously I'd do the hosting bit, I'd introduce the speakers, but I wasn't really, that bothered about doing the talk myself. And even the first talk I ended up doing, which was the Make a Tester one, I had no intention of turning that into a talk. That was just a research thing that I started at the meetup with, well, if the universities aren't doing this, what skills do we need? What do we need? And I used it as a brainstorming session. And it grew its own legs. We started talking about it on every meetup for a few months. And then eventually I was like, I've got to do something more with this. And I used the conference to try and elevate the awareness. So it is sometimes to raise the awareness of a message that you've got or research you've done that you want to get wider. Sometimes it can be about a purpose. Sometimes it can be about elevating something. Sometimes it can just be about elevating yourself and, increasing your personal brand. Maybe, but, subconsciously you're looking for a new job. And actually by doing conferences and talking and getting your name out there, it can help you get that contacts that could be where you get your next role from. The same way that how, raising our name with this podcast helped Chris get a new role, because, this is technically public speaking too, right?
Just our public is remote. We don't get to see them.
Where you choose to speak is quite an interesting thing that and I think we've talked about this with a bunch of different people before, because there's a lot of things that we believe in, and we I think for the most part the four of us kind of agree on doing things the same, even though we wouldn't approach things the same were we in the same seats in different places. But we kind of, like, if I was to say something, it'd be a little bit probably like preaching to the choir. And so, and I've seen a lot of sort of motivation and topic of people saying, how can we take these cool testing topics that we think we all agree with, and so we think that it needs to get verified by getting feedback and reviews and stuff, tick that box. But where else can we go? What other things are there? What other events can we do these things at to try and better our experiences, our exposure, but also to share those things with an audience that maybe don't appreciate those things, haven't had the opportunity to learn those things, read those books, listen to those podcasts and things, where maybe those things that we think are the obvious things that everyone knows, that isn't shared. Like, how do you look outside of your comfortable group? Where do you go? How do you even break into those things? I certainly haven't done that yet, but I see the value in it greatly.
I think it starts with, if you have a topic that you feel you can talk about, or you've got, you're starting right at the beginning, there's desire to do a talk, and there's also desire to build that topic out. That's my two puppies just coming into the room. Yeah, so you've got an idea for a talk. It really is about trying to mold that into, you've got something that actually people would like to hear, and you're not going to know that yourself. You're going to try and build something out. It's having some groundwork in place, and then it's really reaching out. And we've said this about a lot of things, reaching out to the community, whether it be on Twitter, whether it be on LinkedIn, whether it be in other areas, finding online talks that, maybe you start with a lightning talk, maybe you start with a 99-second talk if it's a Ministry of Testing event, about your topic that you feel you want to talk about. Grow that confidence to do public speaking on a smaller scale, and then talk to people about your topic of interest, about the thing that you want to share. Learn some tips from people. Maybe we can discuss a bit here if we have time, on how you build that into a talk, how you then present it, and then just search for those call for papers that you feel are events that meet your criteria, meet your ethos, making sure they have the right code of conducts that you agree with, etc., etc., and finding the events that you feel comfortable talking at, and just take a chance. It may get rejected, but ask for feedback. Try again. Try somewhere else, and eventually you'll get that chance. And when you get that chance, make sure you've done your due diligence on your talk before you do it, and knock it out the park.
I would say that you can also start incredibly small. You can start from a meetup. You can start even with a group in your own company.
Internally.
And what you could do to a certain extent to test your ideas is start with a lean coffee. If you have your idea, use it to write it down as one of the topics. And if people vote for it, and it's then discussed, then it shows that people are interested in it. And then from that, to a certain extent, you can then build on and also create a network of people that have an interest that you can then build up, again, that knowledge or shared knowledge, which you can then take forward. So you don't have to, go out of your comfort zone in order to initially start those ideas off.
How do you sort of deal with things like imposter syndrome? The whole point of someone else could do this better than me, so why would I go through all this thing? I'm not really cut out for that sort of thing anyway.
I deal with it. I don't. I survive it, I guess, is the best way. I feel that all the time. All the rest of it, I feel like generally after these talks and things, people give you things that make you feel slightly better and say good things. It's always been a positive experience versus a complete shredding experience. So it's kind of helped reform that actually maybe I can add. But I still have that complete imposter syndrome every time I talk. Someone here is going to know more than me. Someone's going to find me out. That is every single time I get up and talk, every time.
What I would say is that with that imposter syndrome is when you're thinking about your talk, talking to, it can be just one person, a critical friend. So someone who is supporting you in doing the public speaking or doing the talk, but they will give you solid advice as to how you can improve it. And that will then help shape your talk, but make sure it's someone that's really trusted.
I would say, two ways I've dealt with it in the past, and they're both kind of related, is try and, if hopefully get a morning slot and get it over and done with early. Ideally, as soon as possible, first thing in the morning. Or make sure you're being distracted by plenty of other things before you do it. If you spend time sitting, pondering it for half an hour beforehand, like the worst time for me to have a talk is after a break. If I'm on directly after lunch or I'm directly after a morning break in a conference, I will not eat over the break. I will not drink over the break. I will sit around pondering whether I'm doing the right thing, whether someone's going to, like Russell said, find me out. They're going to think I'm talking rubbish, etc., etc. Whereas if I can go straight into it without having time to think about it, I don't have time for the imposter syndrome to take over. And it's just finding ways to distract yourself out of it. And then when you're in the room, you get through your intro slide, you get through your about me slide or your 20 slides if you're Chris, and then you go into your main content. You kind of get into the flow and it kind of just comes naturally. But it is, I agree, it's that demon on your shoulder when you first walk onto the stage is someone's going to tell me this is rubbish. Someone's going to say, everything I say is wrong.
I'm petrified. I'm literally incredibly stressed, sweating, usually absolutely not in a comfortable position when I do any sort of form of public speaking. I really do not want to be there. Every part of my body is fighting to not stand up. I want to quit. I don't want to do it. I literally want to abandon it before.
I think in some ways the pandemic and doing things virtually, I don't know about the rest of you, but I found that helped doing it online because I was in the comfort of my own office, my own chair, my own desk setup. And I was sitting in a familiar surrounding that I sit in every day for meetings at work. And I was just on another meeting doing a presentation. And although, yes, the audience was different, I was able to control that imposter syndrome a lot more, which, meant I did quite a lot of online talks and conferences during the pandemic because I just felt comfortable doing it.
I really didn't enjoy the virtual conferences and meetups and talks and stuff. sure, I'm on calls all the time. I'm very used to seeing my horrific face back at me the entire time when I'm on calls all the time. And the thing that I really didn't like about either pre-recording things or even doing them live on Zooms or other things was that you don't have that tangible feedback. Like, it loops back to that sort of the imposter syndrome type thing as well. Like, I'm saying stuff and I'm saying stuff now, and you guys are nodding, which means I know that there's a train of thought that people are agreeing with, and that feedback, that instant feedback, is so important, and it's so tangible. And the whole in-person side of thing versus the virtual thing, I found incredibly difficult, and I don't really like it, if I'm honest. I think I'm different. I think my presentation style is different. I know that the rhythm and the personability is less there. I know that I'm less characterful, if you can imagine that. And I'm desperate to be able to see people and talk and stuff. And I am terrified, wholeheartedly terrified. I've done public speaking where I've shaken so much that the stuff around me has moved away from me because I've made the ground shake. But if I'm there and I've got that sort of the feeling of people sort of being with me and seeing me and giving me that support. When I gave a talk at the conference Russell organised with his friends in Newcastle, the Geordie Tester Cellier, I had Russell there, and our friend Sanavissa was there as well, and people I knew, people who knew me, people who knew my story, that sort of thing there, that support, that gave me more strength in the live delivery of those things than I could have got virtually, or if they weren't there, because I think that validation is required, because you certainly don't want to make a fool of yourself. but also, supporting people, and I want to conversely think about you guys if I get the chance to be there to support you also. And I think we've got a lot of journeys of these things coming up. And it's great when you see people pop up who are doing those things, and I hope for more of that to happen.
I agree with you there on the familiarity. I mean, I'm still grateful for you. The first time I did the full talk, the Baptism of Fire talk at UK Star, you introduced me, and actually having someone, although you didn't know me as well then as you do now, we'd made that connection already, and you were keen to introduce me, and that settled my nerves in some respects. And then when I did my first keynote this year, I had 3 of my team sat in the front row. I had some ex-colleagues sat, around as well. Stu Day was there as well, someone else that's, part of our peer group. And it just, it does make you feel more comfortable when there's people that respect your message, respect who you are, advocate for what you're doing. And it does make a difference, definitely.
I think that's a great time to actually finish the podcast tonight. I think that actually this has the opportunity to have another episode. I think that we need to investigate a bit more, especially after this season, when we all have had details of actually talking to people in the flesh and comparing it a bit with Zoom. And also another topic that we didn't have time to discuss, which is something that I'd be quite interested in, is how best to present. So things like the quality of the slides, whether you actually need them or not. So I think that's a really good topic that we might actually touch on.
Tune in for part 2 in the future, listeners.
I think there's also an abstract one as well. How to create an abstract would be another
Absolutely.
one.
So this topic will certainly be going on. So please do let us know how you think that this episode went. What other things could we discuss? What experiences have you had, good and bad, with public speaking? And whether you again agree with what we've saying about the difference between in-person and Zoom conferences, if you've had the opportunity to do it. Thanks again to Chris, Russell and Simon for another great discussion. Thank you for Saffron QA for sponsoring us again. And if you want to reach out to us, you can contact us or see us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can support us on patreon.com. In all these places, just look for the Testing Peers. We are here for you, and we like sharing our information with you. So tune in next time, and we'll look forward to inviting you back.
For now, it's goodbye from the Testing Peers.
Goodbye.